Week number 13, part 1. Tony T here with our college football pick show here for Monday. Well, we got 13 games for you from Saturday, week 13 action. We got 64 games here for this week. So we're going to do them in 6 parts. So we got 13 for you today. Before we get to just a couple things, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Free college football picks are updated all season long. Free picks every day from all the major sports. We also have NFL, college basketball, NBA, NHL, World Cup, and more. It's a good time to subscribe. And also, if you would support our channel, give us that thumbs up. We greatly appreciate it. Then visit TonySpicks.com, our multi-capper site showcasing top cappers in our industry. Click the links to the hot cappers to get signed up to some of our long-term passes. See, Ramon has been pretty hot here. Daniel's been hot. Nick as well. Click the links to get signed up to some of our long-term passes. You'll see our pre and picks here at the center of the page. As well here as our best bet. Each capper can release 1 best bet per sport per day. We've got some up there for right now. $15 pre and pick. A really good value, as well as our 3-pack, so check them out. Of course, our pick ticker, you can buy plays individually there on our pick ticker. Our promo code, well, you can save 20% off all premium pick packages when you use that promo code TonyT at checkout. You can access our page by clicking the link in the description, then the All Capper tab, then get signed up. Also, love to hear from you guys, so post your picks in the comments below. If you are looking for cappers, you can apply over our footer section at Tony's Picks. And, of course, our podcast available on all major platforms. Search Tony's Picks in your major platform and get every pick in podcast form. All right, let's get this one started. South Carolina versus Clemson college football pick Saturday. South Carolina moved to 7-4 with that 63-38 home win at Tennessee. Gamecocks gained 608 yards with 155 rushing on 37 carries. Defensively, they allowed over 5 yards per rush to the Volunteers with 355 passing on 50 attempts. Spencer Rattler completed season highs here, 81% completion rate, about nearly 12 yards per attempt. He threw for 438 yards and 6 touchdowns. Now, this season, Rattler is completing 67% of his passes with 7.7 yards per attempt. Clemson improved to 10-1, a 40-10 home win to Miami. Tigers posted 447 yards with 207 rushing on 48 attempts. They stuffed the Hurricanes' run game to just over 1 yard per rush with 68 yards passing on 18 attempts. DJ Uiagalelei completed 65% of his passes in the win, 6.7 yards per attempt. He passed for 227 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Gamecocks moved the football on the road through the air, 258 yards passing, 9.1 yards per attempt with 68% completions. And the Gamecocks defense on the road giving up 432 yards, 31 points a game. They're also giving up 255 rushing yards on 5.2 yards per rush. Clemson at home, they're rushing for 220 yards, 5.1 yards per attempt. The play here will be on South Carolina and Clemson over 50.5. Old Dominion versus South Alabama college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Old Dominion fell to 3-8 with that 27-14 defeat at Appalachian State. Monarchs gained 394 yards with 86 rushing on 28 carries. Defensively, they allowed nearly 5 yards per run to the Mountaineers with 291 passing on 22 attempts. Hayden Wolf completed 58% of his passes with 8.1 yards per attempt. He threw for 308 yards, 2 touchdowns. Now this season, Wolf a 56% completion rate with 7 yards per attempt. South Alabama 9-2 after their 27-20 road win at Southern Miss. Jaguars gained 411 yards with 154 rushing on 35 carries. Defensively, they held the Golden Eagles to 3 yards per run with 196 passing on 34 attempts. Carter Bradley completed 68% of his passes with 11 yards per attempt. He threw for 238 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. This year, Carter a 64% completion rate with 8.1 yards per attempt. 5 straight losses for ODU with offensive struggles. Past 3 games, Monarchs averaging 276 yards, 5.7 yards per attempt. In this period, surrendering 459 yards, 25 points per game. Jaguars have struggled to get just enough, struggled really to separate from teams to cover games. South Alabama in this period averaging 10 penalties for 97 yards in this 3-game period. The play here will be Old Dominion plus 16.5. New Mexico State and Liberty college football pick Saturday. New Mexico State fell to 4-6 with that 45-14 road defeat at Missouri. Aggies posted 259 yards in this game, 144 rushing on 40 carries. Defensively, they allowed 4.5 yards per rush to the Tigers with 261 passing yards on 31 attempts. Diego Pavia completed in this one 35%, 4.5 yards per attempt. He passed for 76 yards and an interception. Now 5.9 yards per attempt he also had for the season with 46% completion rate for 2022. Now Liberty, they fell to 8-3, a 23-22 home defeat to Virginia Tech. Flames gained 332 yards with 115 rushing on 29 carries. Defensively, they surrendered 3 yards per rush to the Hokies with 148 passing on 20 attempts. Jonathan Bennett completed 53% of his passes with 6.5 yards per attempt. He passed for 98 yards on the year. Bennett a 58% completion rate with 7 yards per attempt. Aggies defense on the road giving up 418 yards, 5.2 yards per rush, 8.1 yards per attempt. Liberty defensively strong at home, holding opponents at 316 yards, 16 points a game. They're averaging 4-point sacks at home. The play here will be Liberty minus 23.5. Coastal Carolina and James Madison, college football pick for Saturday. Coastal Carolina 9-1 after a 26-23 home win to Southern Miss. Chanticleers gained 361 yards, 170 rushing on 42 carries. Defensively, they held the Golden Eagles to under 2 yards per rush with 313 passing on 30 attempts. Jared Guest completed 50% of his passes, but 11.6 yards per attempt. He passed for 163 yards and 2 interceptions. This season, Guest a 45% completion rate, but 10.2 yards per attempt, but 3 interceptions. James Madison improved here to 8-3, a 42-40 home win to Georgia State. Dukes gained 425 yards, 151 rushing on 45 carries. Defensively, they held the Panthers to under 3 yards per attempt with 176 passing on 15 attempts. They overcame 4 fumbles and a 20-point halftime deficit in victory. Todd Centillo completed 78% of his passes with 10 yards per attempt. He threw for 274 yards, 4 touchdowns on the season. Centillo, a 65% completion rate, 9.6 yards per attempt. Dukes have failed to cover 4 of 5. 3 straight wins for the Chanticleers. The past 3 games, Coastal Carolina allowing 2.5 yards per rush and 4 quarterback sacks. The play here will be Coastal Carolina plus the 14. Army versus Massachusetts, college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Army improved to 4-6 with that 34-17 home win to Connecticut. Black Knights gained 323 yards, all rushing on 57 carries, no pass attempts. Tyler threw an incompletion but rushed for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns. This season, Tyler, a 41% completion rate, 14.7 yards per attempt. He is averaging 4.6 yards per run. Massachusetts dropped a 1-10, a 20-3 road defeat to Texas A&M. Minutemen gained 168 yards with 113 rushing on 41 carries. Defensively, they allowed 5.5 yards per rush to the Aggies with 191 passing on 19 attempts. Brady Olson completed 41% of his passes, 2.5 yards per attempt. On the year, Olson a 49% completion rate, 5 yards per attempt. Black Knights with the path to Boyle's ability with a win here and against Navy. Past 3 games, Minutemen allowing 5.7 yards per rush. And all Army does is run the football. The play here will be Army at minus 19.5. Rutgers versus Maryland, college football pick. This one is on Saturday. Rutgers fell to 4-7 with that 55-10 home defeat to Penn State. Scarlet Knights produced 176 yards, 41 rushing on 34 carries. Defensively, the Scarlet Knights allowed nearly 7 yards per rush to the Nittany Lions with 199 passing on 36 attempts. Gavin Wimsatt completed 34% of his passes with 4.2 yards per rush. He threw for 122 yards and a touchdown with a pick. This season, Wimsatt a 45% completion rate, 5.4 yards per attempt. Maryland fell at 6-5 with that 43-30 home defeat to Ohio State. Terrapins gained 402 yards, 84 rushing on 31 carries. Defensively, they allowed 4 yards per run to the Buckeyes with 241 passing on 30 attempts. Talia Tagovailoa completed 72% of his passes with 8.1 yards per attempt. He threw for 293 yards and 2 touchdowns. This year, Tagovailoa a 69% completion rate with 7.7 yards per attempt. Past 3 games, Scarlet Knights at defense allowing 442 yards, 5.9 yards per rush. At home, the Terrapins moved the football well and on the ground and through the air. The play will be Maryland here at minus 14. Georgia State and Marshall, college football pick. This one here on Saturday. Georgia State falls to 4-7 with that 42-40 road defeat at James Madison. Panthers gained 257 yards with 81 rushing on 35 carries. On defense, they allowed 3 yards per run to the Dukes with 274 passing yards on 27 attempts. Panthers blew a 20-point halftime lead and a +2 turnover margin. Darren Granger completed 53% of his passes for about 12 yards per attempt. He threw for 176 yards and a touchdown. On the year, Granger a 57% completion rate with 7.9 yards per attempt. Marshall improved to 7-4, a 23-10 road win at Georgia Southern. Thundering Herd posted 529 yards, 255 rushing on 54 carries. Defensively, they did allow 7 yards per rush with 205 passing on 40 attempts. Cam Fancher completed 53% of his passes, 8.6 yards per attempt. He threw for 274 yards and 2 touchdowns. Thundering Herd at home holding teams to 232 yards, 2.5 yards per rush, 5.5 yards per pass attempt. On offense, they do move the football for 411 yards. Tough losses to JMU for the Panthers. Not only did they blow a big lead, but they lost a chance at bowl eligibility. Play here will be Marshall -6. Michigan versus Ohio State college football pick Saturday. Michigan improved to 11-0 with that 19-17 home win to Illinois. Wolverines gained 376 yards with 168 rushing on 40 carries. On defense, they allowed over 4 yards per rush to the Fighting Illini with 178 passing on 30 attempts. J.J. McCarthy completed 53% of his passes with 6.1 yards per attempt. He threw for 208 yards. This season, McCarthy a 67% completion rate, 7.9 yards per attempt. Ohio State sits at 11-0 after a 43-30 road win at Maryland. Buckeyes gained 401 yards with 160 rushing on 43 carries. On defense, they held the Terrapins to under 3 yards a carry with 318 passing on 37 attempts. C.J. Stroud completed 60% of his passes with 8 yards per rush. On the year, Stroud a 66% completion rate with 9.7 yards per attempt. Wolverines defense has allowed 17 or fewer points the past 7 games. They have covered 5 of 6 on the road. Past 3 games, Wolverines running for 5 yards per rush. The play here will be on Michigan +8.5. Western Kentucky versus FAU college football pick Saturday. Western Kentucky 7-5 with that 41-17 road defeat at Auburn. Hilltoppers gained 385 yards with 85 rushing on 29 carries. Defensively, WKU allowed over 6 yards per run to the Tigers with 122 passing yards on 20 attempts. Austin Reed completed season lows here, 47% with completions, 5.3 yards per attempt. He threw for 289 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. On the year, Reed a 65% completion rate with 7.7 yards per attempt. FAU 5-6 after their 49-21 road defeat at Middle Tennessee State. Owls posted 356 yards, 31 rushing on 32 carries. Defensively, FAU allowed under 4 yards per rush to the Blue Raiders with 448 passing on 54 attempts. N'Kosi Perry completed 53% of his passes, 9 yards per attempt. He passed for 325 yards and a touchdown. On the season, Perry a 56% completion rate with 7.3 yards per attempt. FAU needs the win for bowl eligibility, but the past 3 games, the Owls defense given up 455 yards, 5.7 yards per rush. Hilltoppers in this span averaging 492 yards, 4.9 yards per run, 379 in the passing game with 8.6 yards per attempt. The play here will be Western Kentucky and FAU over 61. Georgia Tech versus Georgia college football pick Saturday. Georgia Tech improved to 5-6 with their 21-17 road win at North Carolina. Yellow Jackets gained 379 yards with 192 rushing on 46 carries. Defensively, they allowed over 5 yards per run to the Tar Heels with 202 passing on 30 attempts. Zach Gibson completed 72% of his passes with 9.7 yards per attempt. He threw for 174 yards on the year. Gibson a 55% completion rate with 5.8 yards per attempt. Georgia improved to 11-0 after their 16-6 road win at Kentucky. Bulldogs posted 365 yards with 249 rushing on 44 carries. Defensively, Georgia held the Wildcats to over 3 yards per carry, 206 passing on 31 attempts. Stetson Bennett completed 68% of his passes, 6.1 yards per attempt. He threw for 116 yards and an interception. On the year, Bennett a 68% completion rate with 8.7 yards per attempt. Yellow Jackets have shown improvement offensively down the stretch, but face a strong defense here. On the road, Yellow Jackets are giving up 411 yards, 4.6 yards per rush. The play here will be Georgia -35. West Virginia versus Oklahoma State college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. West Virginia fell to 4-7 with that 48-31 home defeat to Kansas State. Mountaineers gained 369 yards with 153 rushing on 34 carries. Defensively, WVU allowed 3.5 yards per run to the Wildcats with 294 passing yards on 27 attempts. Garrett Green completed 55% of his passes with 7.6 yards per attempt. He threw for 204 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. On the year, Green a 55% completion rate with 7 yards per attempt. Oklahoma State fell to 7-4 with that 28-13 road defeat to Oklahoma. Cowboys gained 486 yards, 105 rushing on 35 carries. Defensively, they allowed over 5.5 yards per run to the Sooners with 259 passing yards on 40 attempts. Spencer Sanders completed 54% of his passes, 5.7 yards per attempt. He did throw for 381 yards, a touchdown, and 4 interceptions. This season, Sanders, a career low 57% completion rate, 7.2 yards per attempt. No bowl game for the Mountaineers, with head coach likely fired as his athletic director was let go last week. Double-digit road losses this year in the Big 12 at Iowa State, Texas Tech, and Texas for this Mountaineers team. At home, the Cowboys do move the football. West Virginia pass defense on the road is giving up 408 yards, 282 passing, and 8.2 yards per attempt. At home, the Cowboys defense giving up 419 yards, 294 passing. To play here, West Virginia and Oklahoma State over 66.5. All right, that was our college football pick show here for Monday. We got you week 13, part 1. Got you 13 games. We'll get you the next 5 weeks. We'll get at least 10 or more games for you for the next 5 days, I should say. That'll get you through all 64 for this week. Remember, like, subscribe, set notifications. Visit TonySmith.com for our best bets on the day. So get signed up. And don't forget our live show, 9 a.m. each time. It's the Morning Steam with Ramon and Mitty. I'm Tony T. Talk later with more picks.